The apocalypse. When an entire people are destroyed or destroy themselves. The end of civilization. For us today, as we go about our daily lives, it's barely something we consider. We're so sure it couldn't happen to us. But for some civilizations, it already has. Ancient Greece. From the 8th century until the 4th century BCE, ancient Greek civilization flourished. It gave the world democracy, philosophy, and art and architecture that still dominate our lives today. At its height, the ancient Greek colonies reached from modern-day Spain in the west through to Russia in the north and Egypt in the south. It was made up of many competing city-states with their own systems of rule and patron gods. In the heartland of this civilization lay the thriving city of Helike. Helike was a prominent trading port, but the ancient city was best known for the role it played in the worship of the almighty Poseidon, the god of the sea.
Poseidon's moody, he is miserable, he's grumpy, and I find that really interesting because he is the god of the sea. I mean, the sea is obviously important for trade, important for transportation, but it can turn on you like that, and it can take lives.
It's something Helike would discover all too well. In 373 BCE, the city vanishes. According to writers across the ancient world, the entire city disappears beneath the waves. Its location is lost to the passage of time.
The location of Helike is a complete mystery, and it's one of the resounding mysteries of classical archaeology.
It's hauntingly similar to the myth of another ancient civilization lost beneath the waves, Atlantis. We ask the question, what could cause the total destruction of Helike? And is Helike Atlantis? The lost city of Atlantis. It's a myth that has enthralled us for millennia.
We all know the famous story of Atlantis, but it goes all the way back to Plato, who tells us about Atlantis as a great city with an advanced civilization, which ruled over an empire that spanned continents.
According to Plato's myth, the Atlanteans created a civilization to rival the mighty Greeks. But they did not use their power wisely, and this angered the gods.
The Atlanteans grew cruel, they grew harsh, they grew hubristic, and for this they were punished by the gods. The city was destroyed and submerged and lost beneath the waves.
For centuries, it's driven explorers to search the seafloor, uncovering shipwrecks, lost treasure, but none have found the fabled lost city. It's even eluded famed oceanographer Jacques Cousteau, who led underwater expeditions in search of Atlantis in 1975. But there is another lost city, mentioned by classical Greek historians, that may offer clues. Helike. Just like Plato's myth of Atlantis, these authors record how Helike was submerged beneath the waves.
If we look at the story, Helike and Atlantis both disappeared from the face of the earth. They both disappeared into waters. Helike and Atlantis also share the same patron god, Poseidon.
And Plato wrote the story of Atlantis around 360 BCE, just after Helike was destroyed. Could Helike actually be Atlantis? The only way to know for certain is for archaeologists to locate the lost city of Helike. In the 4th century BCE, a period of time known as the Classical period, the ancient Greek city-state of Helike thrived on the shores of the Corinthian Gulf. It's a city with a rich history.
The first time we ever hear about Helike, it's in Homer's Iliad.
The classic Greek myth, the Iliad, tells how Helen, the queen of Sparta, was abducted by Paris of Troy. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, commanded the united Greek armed forces and set sail to bring Helen home.
Helike is listed amongst the many cities of the Peloponnese which send troops for Agamemnon's army to campaign in the Trojan War.
Agamemnon's forces besieged Troy for 10 long years. When this failed, they unleashed their secret weapon, the Trojan horse. This giant wooden horse was left as a gift for Troy. They accepted it and brought it inside the city walls. With the people of Troy asleep, Greece's finest soldiers emerged from inside the horse and opened their gates. Agamemnon's forces could finally breach the city's walls, and Troy fell. Homer's Iliad is a myth, but Helike's role in ancient Greek history is well documented. Helike was the leader of the Achaean League, a democratic confederation of 12 city-states in the Achaea region of Greece. Helike established colonies at Priene in Asia Minor and Sybaris in southern Italy. Trade from these created a period of great prosperity. The people of Helike believed their city was watched over by their patron god, Poseidon. Their temple dedicated to him brought pilgrims to the city from across classical Greece.
Helike was a powerhouse in the ancient Hellenistic Greek world. It was a major religious hub, a pilgrimage spot. It was a political seat. It was a pretty significant city-state.
The temple to Poseidon gave Helike influence in the Greek world, and they benefited economically from this pilgrimage. As war engulfed the region, it placed Helike in a unique position. Between 492 and 479 BCE, the Persian Empire launched a series of invasions with the aim of conquering all of Greece. The allied efforts of the Greek city-states repulsed the Persians, but the Greek world was now on a collision course with itself. In 431 BCE, Greece erupted in war between Athens and Sparta. By 404 BCE, Sparta was victorious. But the economic cost across the region was dire. Poverty soon became widespread. But the people of Helike realized just how economically important the Temple of Poseidon was to their survival. They remained largely uninvolved throughout this period of turmoil for fear of alienating either side. This decision served them well. As the dust settled, Helike and its colonies survived, along with the Temple of Poseidon and the income this brought them. And for a city-state that relied heavily on maritime trade, it made sense that their patron god was the god of the sea.
Poseidon is the god of the trade networks. He's the god who the sailors would be praying to before they set out on their long voyages across the Mediterranean. He's the god who would guarantee you safe passage and bring you back home safely as well.
But Poseidon didn't keep the people of Helike safe. According to the legend, the people of Helike closely guarded the temple venerating Poseidon. When they refused to share sacred items with other cities, he was angered.
They had treated extremely badly a sacred delegation who had come from Ionia requesting copies of the altar and some other sacred items. They had dragged these sacred ambassadors from the sanctuary, and some stories say they actually killed them.
In 373 BCE, Poseidon destroyed the city. the destruction was so complete that it sent shockwaves around the ancient world.
The story of Helike's demise very quickly enters into the popular consciousness. We first get it in the writings of Ephorus, we find it in Strabo, we find it in Ovid, we find it in Pausanias, and Diodorus, and Polybius. It's everywhere. The story starts in 373 BCE, and we hear that Poseidon is angry with the inhabitants of Helike. And what he does is he uses his trident, he causes a terrible earthquake. A tidal wave rolls in from the sea and completely submerges the city. The entire population of Helike was wiped out in this catastrophe, one fell swoop. And not only that, but there were 10 Spartan warships which were anchored in the bay, and they were also dragged down to the bottom of the sea. So this was total wipeout.
Helike's destruction was so severe that the only way the ancient Greek writers could come to terms with it was to blame it on the supernatural. Poseidon, the god of the sea, caused the city to vanish beneath the waves. In the years that follow, its location is forgotten, and the story of Helike becomes Greek legend. The parallels between the myth of Atlantis and Helike's destruction are striking. But what actually happened? And could Helike be Atlantis? The only way to know is to find Helike. For archaeologists to have any hope of locating the lost city and determining what caused its destruction, they need to discern what is fact and what is fiction. Was there any physical proof that Helike had actually existed? Two of Germany's leading archaeologists, Adolf Michaelis and Alexander Konza, explore the shores surrounding the Gulf of Corinth. While resting in a village, they are sold an ancient artifact, a bronze coin.
Poseidon is depicted in a very fine representation of his head, which is a very beautiful classical, actually, depiction of Poseidon. And on the reverse, we have the main attributes of Poseidon, that is his trident, and the two dolphins swimming upwards, all included in a wreath, within a wreath.
But as Michaelis and Konza examine the coin more closely, they make a startling discovery.
The coin bears the letters Helike, which is an abbreviation of Helike. This was the first tangible piece of evidence that the city of Helike actually existed. Up until this point, all we had was the testimony of various authors and the story of Helike's destruction, but this was an actual piece of evidence.
Michaelis and Konza have identified the first piece of archaeological evidence that Helike actually existed. It marks an incredible turning point. Was the lost city of Helike more than just a legend? Could there be some truth behind its destruction? And could it help solve the mystery of Atlantis? Archaeologists need to re-examine the ancient texts describing Helike's destruction. Could they find anything else written here that might help them sort fact from the legend? A key text recounting the disappearance of Helike was written in the 2nd century CE by the renowned Roman author Aelian. Buried in his account is a detail that may lend veracity to the written destruction event, a tsunami caused by an earthquake.
There's a Roman author who talks about the destruction of Helike, and he mentions that 5 days before the event, all the animals, all the rats, all the insects went scurrying away from the site, and that people should have taken that as warning something bad was about to happen.
It's an intriguing detail. But is there any truth to the phenomenon? Geologist Ian Stewart has heard similar stories before. An animal exodus right before a major earthquake.
In 1995, I was in northern Greece, and we were starting to get reports that there had been this earthquake down in the Aegean area. I spoke to fishermen who talked about catching the equivalent of their whole yearly catch in the night before the earthquake struck. And also in their catch, strange fish that they hadn't seen, deep water, squid and things that were very rare. And one of the things that we know is the Earth's crust gets prepared for earthquakes. The stress gets pent up and there's fluids and lots of things change. So the only slight thing is whether animals, particularly ground-dwelling animals, could be sensitive to that. And that seems to be not that far from reality.
The story of animals fleeing Helike in the lead up to its destruction might just be true. And according to the ancient writers, the tsunami that submerged Helike was triggered by an earthquake. But would a tsunami account for its total eradication? To know for certain, archaeologists need to locate Helike. Only then can they begin to understand the cause of its destruction. The hunt is on for the lost city of Helike. They turn again to the ancient texts. It's believed that the remains of Helike were visible for hundreds of years after it was destroyed, and many ancient writers gave descriptions of its location. But over time, its ruins disappeared, and these descriptions lost their meaning. The archaeologists searching for Helike are forced to start from scratch, almost. Poring over the ancient texts, they find a clue. The ancient Greek geographer Strabo recorded that Helike had been submerged in what he describes as a poros. But what exactly is a poros?
Poros in ancient Greek means a narrow passage of water. Archaeologists interpreted this as the Corinthian Gulf.
It was a solid lead for the archaeological investigators. The ruins of Helike had to be somewhere in the Corinthian Gulf. The problem is, the Gulf encompasses a colossal area, 2,500 square kilometers. And according to the ancient texts, just like the myth of Atlantis, the ruins should be underwater.
The expectation was that Helike lay somewhere on the seabed in the Gulf of Corinth. And so over the generations, it becomes this holy grail of underwater archaeology to find where Helike was.
Archaeologists now have a rough geographic area for Helike. It's clear to them that it must lay submerged at the bottom of the Gulf of Corinth. But how can you locate a lost city on the seafloor? It would require an entirely new form of archaeology and a new breed of archaeologist. The hunt for the lost city of Helike is taken up by one of Greece's most famous sons, celebrity archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos. In 1967, Marinatos became a Greek national hero when he uncovered the prehistoric city of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. For some, the civilization on Akrotiri was a strong contender for the lost city of Atlantis. But Marinatos found no evidence to back up this theory, and his ultimate dream was to find Helike. If the lost city could ever be located, Marinatos had particularly high hopes for what it might contain.
He believed that Helike would be a kind of a Greek classical Pompeii. That is, everything you would find in Helike would be there exactly as it was at the moment it was destroyed.
If he could find the city, maybe he could solve the mystery of its destruction. Could he also solve the mystery of Atlantis? Marinatos needs a way of peering beneath the waves to identify any human-made structures on the seabed. He turns to a cutting-edge piece of technology, sonar imaging. In 1973, oceanographer Paul Cronfield is brought onto Marinatos' team. He is tasked with scanning the sea floor. He remembers his time with Marinatos well.
Professor Marinatos was very excited about Helike. He said, because it's an undisturbed classical city that's basically been buried under the ocean and undisturbed for thousands of years, with all the artifacts totally undisturbed.
For this grand expedition, no expense was spared. Marinatos commandeered a Greek Navy landing craft and outfitted it with a drilling rig. If the sonar scanners identified any structures, the team would drill an exploratory core sample to see if they held any ancient remains.
The drilling ship was anchored offshore, and it would come in out of the mist and drop the ramp on the beach. And all the scientists and engineers would come charging down the ramp, like invading the beaches of Normandy or something, except we were invading local tavernas for lunch. At that time of year, the not blooming jasmine is blooming and the fragrance is in the air, and we'd be sitting there listening to Greek music, looking up at the stars. You know, this is exactly how this was 2,000 years ago when the people of ancient Helike were having their dinner. And it was a very magic time.
Back at sea, Marinatos' team scanned the seafloor, hunting for any anomalies or signs of structures. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But incredibly, they identified something.
We picked up pockmarks on the seafloor, and they were very intriguing in straight lines. God generally doesn't draw straight lines. So this could mean it might be man-made. It could be a road or it could be a wall. We didn't know.
With the possibility of ancient Helike lying in the depths beneath their ship, the team deployed the drilling rig to retrieve core samples. Had they finally found the lost city?
There was so much excitement each time we retrieved the core. You know, sleep was impossible. We had to be there because everyone expected to see some artifacts or something in there that would indicate a discovery. It just kept everybody very much electrified.
But all they found was mud and gravel.
After having spent all that time drilling and subbottom profiling, and then find nothing, it was very disappointing.
Despite working through the night for days on end, there was absolutely no sign of Helike. And with the excavating season ending, another chapter in the hunt for Helike came to a close. For Spiridon Marinatos, he would never get the chance to search again. The following year, in 1974, he died of a stroke while excavating on Santorini. He is buried at the site. The location of the lost city of Helike remained a mystery for now. Archaeologist Professor Dora Katsanapoulou grew up on the shores of the Corinthian Gulf, close to where Helike was said to be located. She is well acquainted with the legend of the ancient city's destruction.
People who are raised in the region, they all hear about this story because Helike was the most important city in the region. When I was a child, I was always dreaming of becoming an archaeologist someday in order to try and find this famous lost site. So it was a childhood dream, I would say.
In 1988, Katsanapoulou assembles a team and begins turning her dream into a reality. She picks up where Marinatos left off, using sonar scanners to map the bottom of the Gulf of Corinth. Soon, the sonar picks up something intriguing.
In one location, we found remains of something that looks like being man-made. It's something that has to do with installations of a port. And in another location, in a greater depth, we may have remains of some wrecks of ships.
Analyzing the sonar readout was a man now familiar with the region, oceanographer Paul Cronfield.
We saw 10 of these features, 10 parabolic type features under the seabed. It was very exciting.
According to Aelian, the Roman writer, the night that Helike was destroyed, there were 10 Spartan ships at anchor in Helike's port.
For Katsinopoulou, it was starting to look like they'd uncovered an ancient port. If they could identify the 10 shapes shown on the sonar scans as the 10 sunken Spartan warships told in the Helike legend, then surely they'd have finally located the lost city. But sonar scans alone aren't proof. To be sure, the team needs to dive and examine the structures. But here, they run into a problem.
The Corinthian Gulf, particularly in this area, is very muddy, and when divers go down, as soon as they move toward the target, it's, you know, a real cloud of mud that is raised in front of them, so they cannot really see. It's a very difficult sea to explore.
The muddy conditions on the seabed make it impossible to identify these structures for certain. Still, Katsinopoulou has a hunch these underwater features represent the ancient port of Helike. But how to be sure? She needs a way of narrowing down the search area. Were there any clues that located Helike near these sonar hits? Katsinopoulou returns to the ancient texts. Reading the work of the ancient Greek geographer Pausanias, she comes across something. A description of Helike in relation to the neighboring town, Achaea. Crucially, it mentions a distance.
One says that Helike is 40 stades, that is 7 kilometers, east of the city of Aelion. Going further east, he also comes to another monument in the area, which is known as the cave of Heracles Vuraikos. And he gives us a distance of Helike from the cave of about 5.5 kilometers.
It's said that the people of Helike came there to leave offerings to the demigod Heracles. The location of the cave is still known today. It's a key clue for Professor Katsinopoulou. If Helike is within 7 kilometers of the town of Achaea and 5.5 kilometers of the cave of Heracles, then the lost city must lie in the area where these measurements cross over. The port features that Katsinopoulou uncovered are well within this region. They match the location of the ancient geographical texts. But despite repeated sonar scanning, all they could find was evidence of a port. Why wasn't the rest of the city visible on the sonar scans? Katsinopoulou looks again to the ancient descriptions of Helike's destruction. These texts had been studied again and again by archaeologists before her. But Katsinopoulou has an advantage. She can read these works in ancient Greek as they were written. Had any clues been lost in translation? As she pores over the ancient writings of Strabo, she realizes incredibly this might be the case. It all hinged on the meaning of the word poros, the body of water that Helike was said to have been submerged in.
Poros in ancient Greek means a narrow passage of water. But most archaeologists had interpreted this as the Corinthian Gulf, which was absolutely wrong, because the ancient sources knew the Corinthian Gulf by name. So they could mention the Corinthian Gulf. They didn't have a reason to say Poros. Now, what Poros would mean, in my interpretation, was an inland lagoon or lake.
According to Professor Katsanopoulou's research, the lost city of Helike wasn't at the bottom of the Gulf of Corinth after all, but had been submerged in an inland lagoon. It's a blow for those hoping Helike is Atlantis. Plato's mythological city had been submerged and lost to the sea floor, not a lagoon. But still, in the search for Helike, it's an incredible breakthrough. It was beginning to make sense why Katsanopoulou's sonar scans only showed a port, not the rest of the city.
There was only one problem. If you're thinking about this as a lagoon, there isn't a lagoon there now. There's just solid land. So where was the Poros?
Okay, then I thought, since we have a Poros that is an inland lagoon, then the ruins of the city should lie under this lagoon, because this lagoon covered up, actually, the destroyed city.
But at the point where the sonar scans had identified a port, there was no lagoon, only dry land. But all of Katsanopoulou's evidence pointed to Helike being here. Was it possible that the lagoon had dried up?
The fact that you have a feature close to the shore that may belong to a port, that shows to you that the city is on land. So we said, okay, we checked it out, it's nothing in the sea, we have now to prepare for starting on land.
Katsanopoulou steps ashore. Was there any evidence that this area had once been underwater? If she could find any, then she would be one step closer to locating the lost city of Helike. Among the trees on a farm, just outside the town of Rhizomulus, Katsanopoulou notices something unusual, a bridge, but no river. Examining the geology of the surrounding area, it becomes clear this bridge wasn't always over dry land. Over millions of years, the craggy mountains further inland have been eaten away by rivers coursing through them. As the rivers make their way to the coast, they carry with them a huge amount of rocks and debris.
One of the things that really impressed me was the sheer amount of material that was coming from the mountainside. Those rivers that were coming through, bringing huge amounts of debris down and spreading it across the coastline. So this was one of the most dynamic landscapes I'd ever encountered.
Each winter, the rivers break their banks and deposit sediment across the entire plain. It explains why the bridge is now over dry land.
That bridge was at one point over a river, and it's no longer over a river. The river's about 500 meters away. So that tells us that the rivers have changed since the classical time.
As the sediment builds year after year, the rivers gradually become silted up and the water changes course.
The bridge is a feature that has to do with the geomorphological changes of the plain. Actually, the bridge is evidence for the shift of the river.
For Katsanopoulou, it's a profound realization. The lost city of Helike was submerged in a lagoon, but all her evidence pointed to the location being on dry land. Katsanopoulou suspects a lagoon was once here, but had silted up over time.
The lagoon had completely been silted over by the sediments brought down by the rivers. And that's why today you do not see any lagoon in the area. The lagoon, of course, it is buried under the dry land today.
The ancient texts, the sonar scans, the existence of a lagoon, all pointed to Helike being under this plain. But to know for certain, her team will need to break ground. Katsinapoulou and her team conduct a series of extensive surface surveys along the coastal plain. They drill boreholes down to a depth of 15 meters and examine the samples for any signs of ancient life. In 1993, they find some pieces of pottery.
Inside these soil samples were found the first pottery fragments. Until then, nothing was known from this area. Even to find some first small pottery fragments, it was something to rejoice at.
For Katsinapoulou, these finds indicate an ancient settlement is likely to exist beneath their feet. Could these be the ruins of Helike? The team prepares to excavate. But before the archaeologists can start, they are woken in the night by a horrific noise.
We were conducting our first excavation in the area when this earthquake happened. The Aegean earthquake of 1995. We were very much alarmed because, that happened early in the morning. Of course, living through an earthquake event, it's something dramatic and terrifying.
When the dust from the earthquake settles, Katsinapoulou's team finally break ground. Here they uncover the remains of an ancient building. Helike was destroyed in 373 BCE during the classical period. But frustratingly, the remains uncovered are Roman. They date from a far later period in history. But for Katsinapoulou, it proves they're on the right track.
For me, it was very important because that proved for good that there is ancient occupation in this plain. And you have the real evidence in front of your eyes. You have a building.
As more excavations are conducted, it becomes clear that the site held a very long occupation history. It's promising news. But to edge closer to proving this is Helike, Katsinapoulou's team need to uncover evidence that this site was inhabited during the classical period.
In the foundation trench of this building, we discovered a nice group of pottery fragments from earlier periods, like classical, and even earlier, going back to the 8th century BC. That showed to us that we were in the right track, we were in the right area.
The wealth of finds uncovered indicate that a significant, prosperous ancient city once existed here. But although the team have found traces of settlements from the Roman, the early Bronze Age, and Helladic periods, they haven't found any structures from the classical period, the era that Helike existed in. Until Professor Katsinapoulou's team make a discovery in 2001. Beneath an olive grove, they uncover a series of structures teeming with artifacts. When they date them, it becomes clear they've hit the jackpot.
We can date these buildings as classical because of the finds, that is pottery, coins, and other that date to the 4th century BC.
The artifacts fit the time frame for the story of Helike's destruction. And as Katsinapoulou sifts through the remains, she comes across a timely reminder that people once lived here, an object which appears to be a family heirloom.
One of the most special finds is the terracotta painted head of a female idol, which actually chronologically is not classical, is earlier than classical, because this is a 6th century BC find, and obviously this belonged to the people who owned this building, and this was something like they had inherited from one generation to the other, and was still remaining in this building in 373 BC.
Finally, Professor Katsinapoulou has proof that a large city existed here in 373 BCE, the year that Helike is said to have been destroyed by a tsunami. Had Katsinapoulou finally uncovered the lost city? The ancient ruins her team have uncovered match the historical and geographical descriptions perfectly. But a key question remains unanswered. Was there any proof that this site had been destroyed by a tsunami and submerged in a lagoon? Without this, it's impossible to know for certain whether the lost city of Helike had finally been found. If these ruins had once lay underwater, then the remains of aquatic life might still be present. Katsinapoulou's team re-examined the soil brought up by borehole drillings across the region. When they analyze the sediment samples, they make an important discovery: evidence of microscopic organisms usually found in a marine environment.
You have organisms in these soil samples that show that the environment in which they are found is definitely a lagoonal environment.
These ruins were once submerged in a lagoon, just as the ancient accounts of the destruction of Helike described. For Katsinapoulou, she has proof that these ruins are the lost city of Helike. It's an incredible moment.
Finding something that for over a century was an unresolved problem for archaeology was a major moment. It's an amazing feeling that it is difficult to describe. It is a life's work for me.
Could these ruins finally reveal the truth behind one of the ancient world's greatest mysteries? What actually caused the destruction of Helike? According to the ancient texts, Poseidon was angry with the inhabitants of Helike and caused an earthquake, which triggered a tsunami that overwhelmed and submerged the city. But was a tsunami actually responsible for the eradication of Helike? As Katsinapoulou's team examined the ruins, they found clear evidence that the structures had been destroyed. And crucially, the destruction pattern pointed to a great wave.
In two different locations have been found classical remains of buildings destroyed. And the interesting thing is that in one case, the way one of the walls is fallen shows that it was perhaps the result of a backwash of a tsunami.
It was looking like the ancient texts were correct. A tsunami had engulfed Helike. But a closer analysis of the destruction layers shows something else. Helike has suffered wide-scale destruction before the tsunami hit, almost as if the city was swallowed by the ground prior to being engulfed. What could have caused this?
The Gulf of Corinth is a really interesting area because it's the most seismically active part of Greece, and Greece is the most seismically active part of Europe.
Geologist Ian Stewart was investigating another earthquake that had occurred in 1861 when his paths crossed with Katsinapoulou. What he discovered offered an answer.
I was doing what was called paleoseismology. So you kind of excavate along the fault line and you get some evidence of when that fault last moved during an earthquake. I knew there was an earthquake that had happened in December 1861. So my question was the fault that I was looking at the one that also moved in the earlier earthquake of 373 BC?
Stewart's geological analysis highlighted many similarities between the earthquake of 1861 and the earthquake that triggered the tsunami of 373 BCE. His findings match the destruction seen at Helike.
There was large-scale coastal submergence, large areas of flooding. There was lots of mud and water that had erupted out. There was fissuring of the landscape. 373 BC was a really big earthquake. The plain dropped maybe 3 meters. The tops of the olive trees were just sticking out of the water. This would have been the most intense jolt of this whole landscape. The whole area would have been shaking. And then you just get the feeling of it kind of collapsing down into the sea. It would have been the most extraordinary of event to have lived through. Terrifying.
For Stewart, it seemed likely the earthquake of 373 BCE didn't just cause a tsunami, but shook the ground so violently that Helike was engulfed by water from below. It's a process known as liquefaction. It occurs when wet, loosely packed soil is shaken by an earthquake. It causes the soil particles to break contact, and the moisture rises to the surface. Solid ground takes on the consistency of a liquid.
The main effects of liquefaction 373 BC are dramatic outpourings of water, in some cases kind of bursting and flooding out, but in some cases fountains, like almost like volcanic eruptions, exploding out under great pressure, transforming the whole physical kind of landscape. Burying buildings, burying people, perhaps.
It seems that in 373 BCE, the ancient city of Helike was hit by a cataclysmic earthquake. As the earth opened up, the city and its inhabitants were flooded by water bursting up from beneath their feet. With the city all but destroyed, a tsunami, triggered by the earthquake, engulfed all that remained of Helike. The city was lost beneath the waves. While Helike is giving up its secrets, the myth of the lost city of Atlantis remains as big a mystery as it's ever been. But as archaeologists continue to examine the evidence at Helike, similarities between the city's demise and Plato's tale of Atlantis become clear. Could Helike's destruction be its inspiration?
Poseidon was the patron and most important god of Helike. As god of earthquakes, Poseidon was the most important god for Atlantis. But there is another reason that Plato would be interested in Helike's destruction. He was in Athens. Helike was not very far from Athens. The phenomenon that destroyed Helike impressed very much the ancients. So Plato heard about it. There's no doubt that he heard and he knew about it.
In Plato's tale, the citizens of Atlantis angered the gods, who then sent an earthquake that made Atlantis sink into the sea. The Helike legend offers up a direct parallel. Poseidon is said to have destroyed the city in a fit of wrath at the way the people of Helike had behaved towards some visitors, wishing to venerate him.
If you look at the period in Greek history that Plato lived through, there were lots of big earthquakes. Ones like Helike, where you had the cities destroyed overnight. So to my mind, it's perfectly reasonable that what Plato did was he took reality that he was seeing unfolding around him, and he transposed that into a story of a civilization that had happened way in the past. So it's one of those kind of factional accounts, really, where there's a bit of fact in there, but there's also a little bit of fiction.